Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are very welcome at, well, unfortunately, the final meeting in our series of online lectures dedicated to life and work of James Joyce. Our series is called Oswajanie Joyce'a, which means taming Joyce. And on behalf of all three organizers, the Honorary Consulate of Ireland in Poznań, and English Department of Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, and Irish Culture Foundation as well, with seat in Poznań, I have to say it was an extremely interesting, engaging, and exciting project to do. And we decided to organize this series of lectures to bring Joyce and his works to the people who are outside of academic circles, so to high school students, for example, who take part in educational projects organized both by English Department and Irish Culture Foundation, to just simply readers and people who are just in love in Irish literature. And I think we've managed to do so, of course, with the huge support of academics from Poland who are Joyce specialists, historians, translators, and all our previous lectures are recorded and you can watch them on YouTube channel of Irish Culture Foundation. I have a long list of thank you, but I will leave it at the end of our meeting. And I would like to welcome our two very special speakers for tonight, Professor Clíona Ní Ríordáin and Professor Enrico Terrinoni. Liliana Sikorska will introduce our speakers in a more proper and professional way in a moment. And they will be joined by Secretary of Embassy of Ireland in Poland, Dominic Berkeley. So Dominic, hello. So Dominic will of course represent Ireland tonight at this meeting. And I'm very happy that we have Her Excellency Emer O'Connell, Ambassador of Ireland to Poland as well tonight with us, because Ambassador opened our first meeting in October, and you will close it, not only this one, but as well a meeting on 2nd of June in Raczyński Library in Poznań for an early Bloomsday. We had to adjust to a very busy calendar of Ulysses translator Maciej Świerkowski, because he will join us at this Bloomsday celebration. So Ambassador, over to you right now.
Justina, many thanks. I'm absolutely delighted to be here this evening, and from my own point of view, to say there is indeed a lovely symmetry here this evening. I'm no Joyce expert. I would say I fall into that category of those who have been tamed, essentially, and who have given Joyce a go. So I was really delighted last October to open the seminar series, and indeed to be here with you briefly this evening as well in the context of the final online version very specifically. I really just want to pay tribute to the three partners in Poznań for your creativity and foresight actually in bringing this together and bringing the series together. Yourself, Justina, and all that you do in the context of your work at the Irish Culture Foundation. Indeed, supported by Krzysztof Schramm as our honorary consul in Poznań. We really deeply appreciate that partnership. And indeed, it is wonderful to see the engagement, as indeed the huge interest that has been shown by students as well across Poland in this. And that has been very, very much ably spearheaded as well by Professor Liliana Sikorska. Of course, I think it's really fitting actually that in the month of May, which when we do celebrate Europe Day, in fact, that we are having a particular focus on Joyce and his European perspectives, because of course he was a true European. Living for many years, of course, in France and Italy, as indeed being buried in Switzerland. So we're delighted and delighted to see such Joyce experts on this series tonight. Just from my own perspective, I'm delighted that my colleague Dominic will be sharing his perspectives with you on all that we have planned actually for the month of June, as we look forward to celebrating Bloomsday very, very specifically. of course, on the 16th of June, we will be marking 118 years, I believe, since Nora Barnacle and James Joyce first set out on their very, very first date. And we look forward as an embassy to working with partners right across Poland in celebrating that occasion, and in particular celebrating the new translation, as you have mentioned already, of Maciej Szczurkowski. So just to wish you all an enjoyable discussion. I've no doubt it will be a very enjoyable discussion, and to thank you all again for the foresight, as I say, in terms of this particular series.
Thank you, Ambassador. So Justina, back to you, or should I start with the introductions? All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to open the meeting of Joyce and James Joyce and the European cities. Today we have three great guests who will share with us their different perspectives on the presence of James Joyce in different European cities. And let me start with Professor Clíona Ní Ríordáin, who is a critic and translator who teaches Irish literature and translation studies at the Sorbonne Nouvelle, where she's professor of English. Among her recent publications are the anthology of Jeune Poésie d'Irlande, Le Poète du Ministère, with Paul Ben-Simon, and the monograph English Language Poets in University College Cork, 1970-1980. This came out in 2020. Her translation of Les Tiertons, Mélis Bassir novel about the end of Samuel Beckett's life, I really want to read this one, will be published by Lilliput Press in June. Can't wait, really, honestly. The biofiction is the big thing for us in literary studies. She's one of the co-conveners of the Global Ulysses Conference, and she's a member of the Centre Culturel Irlandais Strategy Committee and presides the CCI's Translation Prize. This year, as part of the CCI's Ulysses celebrations, she hosted the Ulysses in Translation lecture series. Professor Ní Ríordáin, welcome to Poznan, and hopefully we will be able to host you at some point in the city and in the Irish Literature Foundation at the Honorary Consulate.
With great pleasure.
And
I have great affection for Poland, and I know there are deep connections between Polish literature and Irish literature, in particular connections with the poetry of Seamus Heaney.
Oh, yes, there are. Yes, there are, certainly. We're planning a meeting on Seamus Heaney next year, so
very good.
Looking forward to that as well. And our second guest is Professor Enrico Terrinoni, who holds a PhD in Anglo-Irish literature and drama at UCD. He's chair of English at the Università per Stranieri di Perugia and of the Italian department at University of Notre Dame. He translated James Joyce's Ulysses into Italian for the first time in 2012, winning the Premio Napoli for Italian Language and Culture. In 2021, he retranslated it in first ever dual language annotated and commented edition. With Fabio Pedone, he translated the last two books of Finnegan's Wake, winning the Annabel Caro Prize. His translation of the Spoon River anthology was awarded the City of Florence Von Rezzori Prize for the Best Translation in 2019. He edited the new Italian edition of Joyce's letters and essays in 2016. He's the author of Occult Joyce, The Hidden in Ulysses from 2007, and James Joyce, La fine del romanzo from 2015. My Italian is really bad. I don't really speak the language, so I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of the titles. Oltre Habitat il Silenzio, Tradurre la letteratura from 2019, and the last title from 2020 I will not venture to read because I will probably mispronounce it too terribly for your ears. So sorry, but I'll just want to mention that he also did write a text about Joyce and Rome, And this is coming in 2022, but it already won the prestigious the Sanctus Prize awarded by the Italian Ministry of Culture under the auspices of the President of the Republic. He translated works by Brendan Behan, James Stephens, Francis Bacon, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Oscar Wilde, Muriel Spark, Michael D. Higgins, who was one of the presidents. He was a poet. Yes, great. Bobby Sands, Alistair Gray, George Alway, and Simon Armitage. And he's a regular contributor to the Italian newspapers. And Professor Terrinoni, welcome to Poznan. Likewise, the invitation to visit us sometime in the future stands. Last but not least, Dominic Berkeley is the third secretary in the Irish Embassy in Warsaw. He has been a staunch supporter of many of our ventures, and I am really particularly grateful that he joined us at the opening of the JAUPE conference in Poznan in 2019. JAUPE is the International Association of University Professors of English, and was really supportive about our celebrations of 2020 St. Patrick's Day, which unfortunately were canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But Dominic, you're always welcome in Poznan in person. So thank you for joining us today online. Once again, all three of our guests, welcome. Back to you, Justina.
All right, we have a long list of questions to our guests. So maybe we'll start with the questions related to translations, because it's subject very, very widely discussed right now in Poland, especially that's the second Polish translation of Ulysses. And our first meeting actually took place on 14th of October, and it was a very, very special date, like for all literature, Irish literature fans in Poland. It was a launch of official launch of the second Polish translation by Mr. Maciej Świerkowski, and as well of his book, a guidebook to Ulysses, which was quite fast nicknamed Lifeboats to all readers traveling on Ulysses Ocean. And Maciej Świerkowski has countless meetings, and this translation had a huge media coverage. So it's really, really something which drew an attention. So maybe first question to Professor Ní Ríordáin about translation, French translation of Ulysses. Well, everything started in Paris, 2nd February 1922, Ulysses is published. And was there a translation, French translation of Ulysses that caused such wide media academic discussion as the one I've mentioned in Poland?
So there were two French translations of Ulysses. The first was published in 1929, and it was a translation that was carried out by Auguste Morel, Stuart Gilbert, and Valérie Larbaud. And Joyce is said to have supervised that translation, but I think he supervised it from afar. I'm sure Enrico can add complements of information to that. But whereas people would ask questions to solve particular issues, and that was the first translation, and it was the translation that I suppose remained in place until many years later, until 2004, when a second translation was published under the direction of the scholar Jacques Aubert. And Jacques Aubert is known for several things. He's known because he's the person who introduced the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan to Joyce. And the discovery of the works of James Joyce and of Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake in particular had a huge influence on Lacan's theories of psychoanalysis. And Jacques Aubert's translation was done by a team of translators and scholars, most of whom are dead now, unfortunately. But in the lecture series that I organized in Paris, we had one of the translators, Tiffaine Samoyau, who was the only woman involved, come to talk about her translation. And she talked about the translation of the Penelope episode, which is Molly Bloom's soliloquy. and she compared her translation to the Auguste Morel translation. And so it's interesting to look at the different choices that have been made. And both translations continue to exist side by side. And the French public, who were used to reading the first French translation that dated from 1929, still have a debt of loyalty to that translation. It's also the version that is published in the prestigious Pléiade edition, which is leather bound in Bible paper with gold bindings. And so it has the weight, I suppose, of what we call in French the objet livre, the beautiful book that people want to take with them. The other one was published also by Gallimard, and it's available now in a folio paperback edition. And they've made a kind of a compromise, because what they've done is they've taken the notes from the Pléiade edition, which were really quite extensive and are a feature of the Pléiade version of the book, if you wish, and they've added the notes to the folio edition. So it's a kind of a hybrid compromise, if you wish.
So I would say it's a similar situation as we have in Poland. There are some people who think that the first translation was better. There's a huge amount of fans of the second translations, when I'm the one as well. And the fact that we have this additional book, Votul Visesa, it makes really easier to understand just for readers. And I found, the question to Professor Terrinoni, I found on the James Joyce Italian Foundation website information that Italy holds the world record for the number of Ulysses translation. And if I'm correct, say me if I'm wrong, there were 2 separate translations last year published. And how would you explain this huge interest in Ulysses?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the question, beautiful question, and for the invitation. And sorry if my voice is a bit low, because I've been teaching for 6 hours in a row, so I'm still a bit confused and puzzled. Now, I have a lot of different explanations. I don't have one unique explanation for this. What I can say is that Italy has a very long tradition of Joyce scholarship, which dates back to probably Umberto Eco, who wrote the first Italian book on Joyce in the 60s, a great book that then became part of his main work on the open text. And then there was the Roman school led by Melchiori, a great Shakespeare and Joyce scholar, with so many of his pupils who carried out the fight, the struggle for making Joyce known and appreciated in this country. But we also have the Trieste school, a lot of people that work on Joyce in Trieste. We have so many Bloomsdays organized every year. Now, the reason why we have so many translations is probably because we somehow feel that Joyce was partly, like 10%, an Italian writer. He wrote a lot of things in Italian. He adopted the Italian language. He adopted Triestine language as a family language. So he spoke with his kids, with Giorgio and Lucia. He spoke Triestine and Italian, and he always was. He remained affectionate to this to our tongue. So I think that somehow, having spent so many years of his life in Trieste, which technically wasn't Italy back then, it was part of the Austrian Empire, but it was an Italian-born city, of course. And then he also spent some months in Rome. We might talk about this later. I'd say that 1/6 of his life was spent in Italy. So for one thing, I do believe that we owe him something. And the message that Joyce's works are at their heart, democratic works, has been accepted here. So a lot of translators, without being Joyce scholars, they just decided to take up the job. So there are so many versions of Dubliners, very many of A Portrait of the Artist, Ulysses, I think that more than what you said, like I think we have 6 or 7 translations of Ulysses. Some of them are done by scholars, some of them are done by writers, some of them are done by amateurs. And personally, I'm always encouraging people to translate the book again, because I've always thought that great books deserve many translations. Each translation is a new rendition. And it's also, in a way, a new surrendering. You know, to render means 2 things. It means to render and sometimes also to surrender. So I think that Joyce's books deserve as many translations as possible so as to recompose the original light. I must also say that all of his works have been translated. We have 2 different versions of Stephen Hero. Okay, a book that not too many people read nowadays. We have many translations of chamber music. Joyce is very popular, and it is also popular because to send the message that Joyce was a man of the people. Like very recently, we have this very popular singer, you might know him, called Giovanotti, who did a TikTok video on Ulysses, and after that video my edition of Ulysses sold out. So I mean, Joyce is becoming very popular for many reasons. I don't have one explanation, but I do think that at least his love for Italy is being, in a way, parallel to our love for Joyce and for Ireland.
As a footnote, there was a translation of Echo's The Poetics of Joyce. And this is a very old translation. I think it's 1994. Sorry, it's 1998 in Polish. But I think it predates the English translation. So it's kind of interesting then.
Oh,
for anyone interested in the poetics of James Joyce, here it is in Polish for you as well. Sorry, Justyna, back to you.
No. I think we have to organize this meeting with which we have in our minds with different Joyce translation, with the Joyce translator from different countries. That's our idea for this maybe second part of the year. You mentioned TikTok. I know this is probably not a news to you, but I just recently discovered on Spotify special playlists with music well inspired by Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake and the music which appears in the book. So it's fascinating to see how popular it is on different platforms. Back to Professor Ní Ríordáin, because there's a very special edition of Ulysses, which was published in 1935 with illustrations by French artist Henri Matisse. Can you tell us more about this unique cooperation? I saw recently that one of the probably less available books just went sell on some incredible price. I don't know, like over 6,000 euros or something like that.
So that was an edition that was published for a club in the United States called Limited Edition Club in America. And it was published in 1935, and it was a collaboration between Joyce and Matisse. And as you've said, so that if you look for it online, you can see the illustrations. They're very recognizably Matisse drawings with those big pencil strokes and the figures which are dancing and animated like we see in many of other Matisse's other works, like Jazz, for instance. And it very quickly became a collector's item. And you have mentioned sums. I think I've seen volumes going for somewhere in the region of 8,000 volumes, 8,000 euros volumes, which were signed both by Joyce and by Matisse. And of course, Joyce was very much introduced into the literary and artistic world in Paris. It happened at the very beginning because when he arrived in Paris in July 2020, he intended only to stay for a few weeks. What he was looking for was somebody to translate Dubliners and a portrait of the artist as a young man. And he ended up staying there for 20 years. And for those of you who are interested in Joyce's life in Paris, can I recommend a book which isn't an academic book? It's written by a former Irish journalist who worked for RTE, a man called Conor Fennell. and he's written a book called A Little Circle of Kindred Minds, Joyce in Paris. And when he was researching the book, he got in contact with me. I think Declan Kybert had given him my name, and I had a little blue Twingo car at the time. And we went on this mad city tour visiting all of the various locations where Joyce lived, because he moved around a lot. In the beginning, short of money. And so his family moved from various locations in the 16th to the 7th arrondissement. And when he was leasing Ulysses, he also stayed for a while with Valérie Larbaud, who was one of his translators. And in actual fact, there's a plaque on the wall just down the road from the place where the Centre Culturel Irlandais is located today. And of course,
I think we've lost Professor Joyce'a for a moment. Yeah, that's the charm of, okay.
Yes, you're back.
Polish seminarians, including Karol Wojtyła, lived in that building, and it was occupied by Polish seminarians for a considerable period of time in the second half of the 20th century. So in any case, there's a plaque on the wall just down the road which says, James Joyce, British citizen of Irish origin, completed Ulysses in this house. But Conor Fennell's book is excellent because it's really for the general reader, and he talks about the importance of Ezra Pound, who suggested to Joyce that he might go to Paris. Joyce was planning to go to London to finish Ulysses, and he thought that Pound felt that Paris might be more convivial, and he introduced Joyce to other writers. And within 3 days, he met Sylvia Beach, the owner of the bookshop Shakespeare and Company. So it was really, he was a kind of an accidental tourist in a sense, showing up in Paris with plans to organize translations, and he ended up staying there for a considerable amount of time.
Thank you very much. So just in case any of us will be traveling to Paris, we hope you can be our guides on all the places.
I don't have the blue Twingo anymore, but sure, absolutely.
And Liliana already mentioned, Professor Terrinoni, your book about Joyce's time spent in Rome. Was it already published? Because I saw somewhere that it was the date of the publishing was 2nd February this year. So some very symbolic date. And will it be translated into English?
Now, I don't know about that. Hopefully, if anybody wants to take up the job. I know that some publishers are reading it now, but I don't know if we will be translated into English. Yes, it came out on the 2nd of February, and the title would translate into English Upon All the Living and the Dead, which is the ending of the Dead. And this is because both the Dead and Ulysses, the first ideas about those works came to Joyce's mind while in Rome. He lived in Rome for only 7 months and 7 days between 1906 and 1907. And talking about plagues, if you come to Rome and you go to Via Frattina, which is now a very fashionable street, but back then it was a place that where anybody could live, you will see this very nice plague written by Giorgio Melchiori many years ago, that reads something like, "Here lived James Joyce, who turned his Dublin into our universe." I think this is very poetic, and it's also very true. Joyce had the idea of writing Ulysses in Rome, but then it was not a book. I mean, he did not have in mind to write a book. He had in mind to write a short story that would probably be included in Dubliners, perhaps after the death. It might have been the final short story about Ulysses. He then developed the ideas in Trieste, where he got to know a lot of Jewish people, and he got to know Italo Svevo and other people who became models for characters in Ulysses. But the first idea was in Rome. He mentioned this thing twice, and he also mentions the idea of writing a story about this guy, Mr. Hunter. Mr. Hunter is the great mystery of Joyce's life, because we don't know how much he knew about Mr. Hunter, but we can suspect that he knew something, because Mr. Hunter was a Dublin man married to a woman called Marion, like Molly, and Marion was the niece of Lewis Carroll, right? The writer Lewis Carroll of Alice in the Wonderland, and in Finnegan's Wake, a book that is so crowded with allusions to Rome. In Finnegan's Wake, we read this very strange sentence, which is A-liss, A-L-I-S-S, in Hunterland. So I think we can be fairly sure that at some stage Joyce came to know that this Mr. Hunter was the first model of Leopold Bloom, was not just married to a woman called Marion, but probably was also related to Lewis Carroll, and we know how much Lewis Carroll's works are important for Finnegan's Wake. But the reason why Joyce moved to Rome are uncertain. We don't really know why. I mean, we know the practical reasons where he went to work in a bank. The money was much better than what he was making up in Trieste. But then he moved to Rome and he didn't like the city at all. The first month he was okay with it, especially because he was always drinking wine outside, and he was happy. But then he had problems because he didn't like his work. The working hours were too heavy for him. And Nora was always alone with little Giorgio. At some stage, Joyce had to find himself a second job and started teaching English in a school. So he didn't not have any time to write anything creative, but he wrote a lot of letters. The amount of letters from Rome in those 7 months is incredible. And in Rome, we know that he had these two great ideas, the Dead and the Ulysses, but he also developed a sort of political consciousness, because he started following the debate within the Socialist Party in Italy. And he called himself an anarchist. He was incredibly interested in the politics of Italian socialism. But there is another mystery that I think I'm trying to give a solution to. I mean, one of the many possible solutions to. As I said, Joyce moved to Via Frattina, which is in the city center now, and it's very close to the Spanish Steps. But after a couple of months, he was kicked out. He was evicted, probably because he was drinking too much and was being very noisy at night. We don't know, but we can have. I mean, probably this is the reason why he had to find for himself and his family a different place to live. And where did he end up? He ended up in Tor di Nona, the Tower of Nona. This is in front of St. Peter's on the other side of the river. And this is exactly 100 meters from the last prison of Giordano Bruno. Giordano Bruno, the philosopher burned at stake by the Church of Rome on the 17th of February, 1600. Giordano Bruno was the main, the favorite philosopher for Joyce. A lot of his ideas come from Giordano Bruno, is present in so many different shapes in Finnegan's Wake. But I mean, we find Giordano Bruno in Stephen Hero, we find him in a portrait, and in Ulysses, where we have a guy called Nolan, which is of course an Irish surname, but we also have so many other identifications of him. So Joyce went to live very close to the last prison of Giordano Bruno. Giordano Bruno lived there for a few days before being carried to the square of Campo dei Fiori, the Field of Flowers. And let's remember that the nickname of Bloom in Ulysses is Henry Flower. And our man, Mr. Hunter, was called Alfred Henry Hunter. So basically, on the day of the 17th of February, when we commemorate the death of the martyrdom of Giordano Bruno, Joyce went to the square, and the route that he took was the very same route that Giordano Bruno had taken on the way to his death. So this it sprang up memories in me, because when I moved to Ireland first, I was about 22, 23, like Joyce when he moved to Trieste. And where did I find a flat for me and my partner? I went to live very close to the house of my favorite writer, Brendan Behan, because, you know, when you're young, you have this impression that you move to a place where your favorite writer lived, and you breathe in the atmosphere and the things that made him such a great writer. And I was comforted in this idea when I came to know that also Bob Dylan did the same when he went visiting the house where Neil Young was born. So we do these things, and Joyce did that, in my view. He moved to Rome. He was not too happy about the city, but when he was evicted, he needed to find a place that gave him ideas. And let's remember that the reason why Joyce left Ireland are spelled out in Ulysses. I mean, Stephen Dedalus is fighting against two major powers, the British state and the Catholic religion. So he says, I'm a servant of two masters. And we always have to remember that Ulysses, the book begins with the word stately, and the first sentence of the book ends with the word crossed. So we have stately and cross, and they are the two powers that really kept Stephen as a servant. When he moved to Rome, he found the very same thing. Rome was the capital of the Italian monarchy and of the church. So it is as if Joyce needed to be close to his main enemies. You know, like sometimes we also do that. We do not escape from the things that scare us. We look for them. We need to face the very things that put us in danger. So I think that there are a number of very strange, traumatic experiences that led him go to Rome. And one thing on which I want to end this my answer to your question is that in 1921, Joyce was about to finish Ulysses, and in a letter that he wrote to the Valérie Larbaud, he said, as soon as Ulysses finished, I will move with my family back to Rome. He never did that, because 1922 would have been the year where Mussolini and his fascist crowds marched to Rome, and Italy became, for 20 dark years, a fascist regime. So Joyce never did that. He left that to Ezra Pound. But his idea was to move back to Rome soon after the completion of Ulysses. And we know this from a letter that is never quoted in Joyce studies, unfortunately. I'm not the only one that quotes this. This is a letter to Valérie Larbaud where he says that. So Rome must have been for him a place of trauma, but also a place full of richness in terms of imaginary.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Yeah, just we should all keep just our fingers crossed for translation of your book for unfortunately not Italian speakers here in Mosty. Liliana, over to you.
Yes, it sounds absolutely fascinating. Of course, when you talk about Giordano Bruno, it made me think of Beckett and Dante, Bruno, Vico, and Joyce. But let's leave it for another meeting. Let's go back to the cities, which is let's go back to Trieste. They stayed there for quite some time. Their children were born there, and why do you think they stayed for so long, despite the fact that he was drawn to Rome and that never happened, and perhaps other places? What do you think was really the pull of Trieste for the Joyces, not only for James?
Now, I think that while Rome was hell, Trieste was heaven. Joyce was always attracted to the two things. He loved Trieste. Trieste was his new Dublin. But it was a new Dublin, but with a lot of things that Dublin didn't have, like multiculturalism, multilingualism, the active presence of the Jewish community in Trieste. So sometimes we have a feeling that especially like in some chapters of Ulysses, like Circe, the 15th episode, when we see Bloom and Stephen moving along the lanes of Monto, the red light district of Dublin, we do feel, knowing Trieste, that those streets really belong to Dublin as much as to Trieste. You know, the great book that Joy McCourt wrote many years ago called The Years of Bloom, that is now been translated into Italian, makes this very clear. A lot of the experiences that the Joyce had in Trieste are the foundational texts, mental texts for the adventures of Ulysses. Now, the reason why he moved to Trieste, I think, was pretty casual. Like, he did not expect Trieste to be like this. And in fact, when he moved there because there was a job. He thought that there was a job waiting for him there. But when he moved there, there was no job for him. So he was advised to go to Poland, and where he could actually teach in the same school, in the Berkeley school. And then after a few months, came back to Trieste, and he stayed in Trieste about a year. And then he moved to Rome for those 7 months. When he came back to Rome, actually, his idea was to go live in Marseille. There are a couple of letters from the last part of his Rome period where he says that he really loved to go to Marseille, but for some reason it goes back to Trieste, probably because Stanislas, his brother, was living there, and Joyce needed a help, also in financial terms, from Stanislas. So the second time they go to Trieste after Rome, he realizes that this is the city where he can stay safely and be happy and make friends, and his family would be as happy as he wished to be. There were problems, of course. I mean, the family was never really satisfied because they had a lot of problems. But it is in those years that Joyce meets the people that will become his real models for Ulysses. First among them, the Italian writer Italo Svevo. Sorry about this. There is a ring in the university. So he met Italo Svevo in 1907, a few months after having left Rome. As I said, Joyce was a banker. He worked in a bank in Rome. And what did Italo Svevo do? He worked in a bank for 20 years. Okay, so there is an anecdote which I think it's pretty accurate. And when Joyce moved to Zurich after his 10 years, almost 10 years in Trieste, he always had a portrait of Italo Svevo on the wall or on his desk, I don't remember. And people that would go visit him would ask him, who is this man? And he would answer, this is Leopold Bloom. So Leopold Bloom is really like, he is model of Italo Svevo, and many other characters are there from Trieste. I mean, Almidano Artifoni, many people that he met in Trieste actually became characters of Ulysses. So, I mean, Trieste was probably, as I said, his second Dublin, you know, the second city he liked. Of course, Paris was incredibly important. Paris was his way out. I mean, he became James Joyce in Paris because Paris was not a province like Trieste was. Paris was the center of life, and people started adoring Joyce there. But he always kept this love for his old town, Trieste, whereas he kept his hatred for Rome, a productive hatred.
Thank you very, very much. Let's move to Paris then, since you've already started discussing the city of Paris. But this is a question for Professor Ní Ríordáin. How do you pronounce your name? Clíona? Your first name? Clíona. Okay. If I may, could you please tell us a little bit more about Joyce in Paris? Well, he comes from Dublin. Dublin is said to be a provincial city. Then he comes to this great city of Paris. We know it shaped him as a writer, but what do you think was his reaction to Paris as the city of artists, as the city of poets? You know, the Paris of the 1920s, you have all the Hemingways and others. So what made Joyce, or what created James Joyce in Paris, or who created James Joyce in Paris?
I'm not sure anybody created James Joyce in Paris. I think that when he came to Paris, he, as Enrico has said, I think he was almost fully formed. I think what Paris supplied for him was the material wherewithal. In other words, Sylvia Beach, who agreed to publish the book, Ernest Hemingway, who was the foreign correspondent for the Toronto Star and who helped Sylvia with the subscriptions, who came up with the scheme for smuggling Ulysses into the United States. I think that there was a material element there to his life in Paris, which meant that he could do the writing that he wanted to do. And he had the help of people like Samuel Beckett, like Padraig Colm, who came and who supported him in this task. But I'm not sure that spiritually he ever felt the same love for Paris that he felt for Trieste. And I think we see that because that even though he spent 20 years living in Paris, French never became the language of the home. And I think that's an important element to recognize. As Enrico has said, he really mastered the Triestine dialect of Italian. He wrote in it, he translated into it. And I know that Tiffaine Samoyau, the French translator and academic and critic, has said that her evidence shows that his mastery of French was considerably less than his mastery of Italian. So we have the impression that his circulation, if you wish, within the artistic communities in France and in Paris in particular, is very much the artistic community of Anglophones and Anglophiles, and that his integration into life into French life, in a sense, is perhaps less pregnant and less penetrating than his integration, particularly in life in Trieste. I don't know whether Enrico would agree with me there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, back to Krzysztof now.
Yes, I learned that it's very important, to understand Joyce, but I think it's also very important to have a possibility to explore Joyce by people who would like to learn about his life and places where he spent some of his time. What Professor Enrico just says, it's very important to touch Joyce, to breathe the same air where he was. I think it's also very important to go on the trip by Blue Twinger, like you've done in Paris. But let's start from the home city of Joyce, I mean Dublin. So the question is to Dominic. Let's have a look at Joyce traces in Dublin. What you can recommend for visitors who'd like to explore Joyce in the home country.
Thanks, Krzysztof, and thanks to all the organisers for the invitation to be part of today's event. It's wonderful to be here and hear the amazing expertise of both Clíona and Enrico as well. I'm no Joyce expert, unfortunately, but I'll hopefully share some perspectives as a Dubliner, I suppose, as well. And I remember when I read Ulysses, I certainly was able to relate to a lot of the places mentioned in it, and Dubliners as well. As a sort of a somewhat local as well. So, I do think that Joyce, I suppose, he obviously is a household name in Ireland, even with those who haven't even tried to engage with his work. In terms of his life, I suppose, during his time in Dublin, I thought it might be useful to for those maybe less familiar with Dublin, just as a kind of a basic sense of, well, some of the landmarks maybe in the likes of Ulysses, who which are still important landmarks today, just to give a sense of those today in that sense. So I might just share my screen here. I just have a couple of basic images for those again who are not as hopefully hoping to visit Dublin maybe, or indeed, let me have a look here. Sorry about this. Sorry, I'll just. Great. So I have a few just basic images here. The Martello Tower, of course, the opening of Ulysses, the first scene. would be actually Joyce spent, I think, 6 nights himself there, I believe, in the tower itself. It's now the home to the James Joyce Museum as well. It's in the south of Dublin, about 30 minutes from the centre of town as well. So you can see the sort of the view out over the bay there that he would have, that Buck Mulligan and Stephen Deldulis would have seen in that opening scene there as well. So it's just a kind of a sense of the Martello Tower. It's still an important landmark today. As I mentioned, the museum is based there. And it is also very close to a very popular bathing spot actually in Dublin, where many Dubliners still go to sort of dip in the Irish Sea in all seasons. So it's still a kind of an important landmark in that sense. The next one I wanted to mention as well is just the house of Leopold de Molly Bloom, of course, on 7 Eccles Street, which is in the north of Dublin city centre. Unfortunately, the house itself has been demolished, but it would have been the sort of that kind of old Georgian townhouse style in terms of the location of it, which you can see still on Eccles Street itself, quite close actually to the James Joyce Centre, which is based on North Great Georgia Street, only about 10-minute walk away as well. So this front door, I understand, has been salvaged though, so they do have the front door of the original 7 Eccles Street available to view in the centre. So of course, Leopold Bloom on his travels on the 16th of June passes a number of very well-known landmarks in Dublin that we still know today. I mean, of course, places like O'Connell Bridge, Trinity College, Bachelor's Walk, these kind of areas that would still be in common parlance, I suppose, among ordinary Dubliners today. So it's kind of interesting to see how things have developed, not only but also to see how his presence is still felt in these places as well. The next place I wanted to mention is particularly important as well, and still has a lot of cultural significance, namely Sweeney's Pharmacy. And I know there was only a short spell during Ulysses where Leopold Bloom goes into the pharmacy, but it's still, as you can see, the facade and the celebrations around Bloom's Day are still very much front and center in the it's very close to Trinity College in the city centre, so you can see the celebrations there. It stopped being a pharmacy, I think, a functioning pharmacy, I think in 2009 or so, and now it's actually a cultural centre where Joyce's works can be sort of explored, and they organise many exhibitions and initiatives around Joyce as well. You can see a little bit more about that Sweeney's there. Now, the next place I just wanted to mention is, of course, Davy Byrne's pub. Again, very central in Dublin, just off Grafton Street on Duke Street. You could see a picture of the sort of the facade there. And again, this is where James Joyce, of course, had his gorgonzola sandwiches and a glass of Burgundy, which is also on the menu. It's still in Davy Byrne's pub and restaurant, which is a nice kind of throwback to that. And they do organise a variety of different events and gatherings on Bloom's Day as well. So you can still see that sort of influence, I suppose, in some of these locations. Otherwise, was around different of James Joyce just off O'Connell Street on North Earl Street, the modern UCD, and that's where he would have studied. So there's pieces of Joyce in a variety of different places across Dublin, which is yeah.
Thing happened, or is it my computer?
No, I think its microphone is off.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure where I cut out there. I was passing back to Krzysztof anyway, but just a kind of an overview of some of the locations. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, and just the next stop for Joyce was France, actually Paris. So the question is to Professor Clíona, for Joyce fans who arrive in Paris, a place to be first place to visit is a bookshop, Shakespeare and Company. What is the story behind this place? And connected with this question is also the next. What else we can see? What places based on Joyce's story we can find in Paris, and you can recommend this?
So Shakespeare and Company bookshop, the original Shakespeare and Company was on Rue de l'Odéon. And there's a plaque marking the site of that. The Shakespeare and Company bookshop that is open today in Paris is not the original bookshop, and it's not connected to the original owners. It was taken over by a man called George Whitman, who bought I suppose the name from Sylvia Beach, and he actually called his own daughter Sylvia Beach Whitman. So there's a homage to the person of Sylvia Beach there. And today the bookshop is located across the river on the left bank from Notre Dame Cathedral, and it has become a hub for Joyce fans. It has expanded in recent years, so it includes a cafe and a rare bookshop, and it also, George Whitman set up a tradition of putting visiting writers up. So they were known as the tumbleweeds, and they could stay upstairs in the bookshop in exchange for selling some books or tidying the shelves. And that tradition continues today. Sylvia Beach Whitman runs the bookshop today with her husband, and they have made it into a cultural hub. They hold many readings, poetry readings, lecture series, creative writing talks upstairs in the place where the tumbleweeds, those traveling writers, used to stay. But it keeps, I suppose, the spirit of that connection and that connection with Joyce alive. But it doesn't actually have any connection other than the name with the original bookshop, which you can see if you go to the Rue de l'Odéon. And then, as I said, there's the plaque to Joyce in the place where Valérie Larabeau lived. And there are various other sites which you can visit, such as the Fouquet's on the Champs-Élysées, which is a restaurant where Joyce liked to go and drink champagne and toast his singer friends. Because the interest in music was an interest that he kept all of his life, and he used to love to go to the Paris Opera, especially when Irish singers were singing roles and he would get up and applaud them very noisily. And Nora is said to have said that she wished Jimmy stayed with the singing, that she felt that she would have had a much better life than with the writing.
Thank you very much. Okay, and next choice, move to Italy. So the question is very similar to Professor Enrico. How is James Joyce commemorated in Trieste and Rome? I think the most important two cities in his life in Italy. I saw a picture of the monument of Joyce at the bridge over Canale Grande. Maybe something more you can
You do have a lot of events, but that's the only thing that you could see in Rome. Whereas in Trieste, you'll find a lot of things. I mean, my first advice would be to get a book published many years ago in bilingual edition, Italian and English, called in English Triestine itineraries. And basically, the people like Renzo Crivelli, John McCourt, and their friends, they created the itinerary of Joyce's life in Trieste. So all the places where he lived, all the places that they went to, and the connections to his works. And in Trieste, if you follow the path drawn by this book, you can actually find so many plaques in Trieste that commemorate all of the places where Joyce lived and went. It's very nice if you have a couple of days to spend to go to Trieste and follow this itinerary. You understand a lot of things about Joyce and about the way that he was able to change scenario and to change context and adapt to different contexts. Now, so that's my first advice. As regards cultural commemorations, we do have a lot of, as I said, a lot of Bloomsdays in the country. The oldest one probably is the Genova one. In Genoa, they have this Bloomsday. They've been having this Bloomsday for forever, probably 20 years, organized by Massimo Bacigalupo, an American scholar and Joyce scholar. Then you have the Trieste Joyce School. It's normally at the end of June, and it's like 7 days in Trieste with expert scholars, I mean, very famous scholars, but also students and promising young Joyce scholars. You also have the Bloomsday Week. In Trieste, they have a lot of events organized on the Bloomsday Week. One of them this year is a very strange, dramatic rendition of Ulysses that I made. I basically turned Ulysses into a play in 9 scenes. It's in Italian, and it will be performed by a very famous actor here called Monio Vadia. So whoever is in Trieste on the 18th of June can see that. It's like 50 minutes in a theater, and you will have a taste of what Ulysses sounds like. But there will be a lot of other events. In Rome, I will not be in Rome. I will be in Dublin, unfortunately. Luckily, because there are a lot of celebrations in Dublin, but there are events being organized in Rome too. There is a rendition of Finnegan's Wake called Fluido Fiume by another famous actor called Enrico Frattaroli on the 17th and 18th. There's a lot of things going on in Italy, especially this year. But can I spend a couple of seconds for what we're doing in Dublin? Because we're going to go there for the third leg of this Global Ulysses event that I and Clíona and Declan Kuipert and the people from Notre Dame have been organizing for the past couple of years. But what we will do in Dublin is we will launch a book that it will be out on Bloomsday. It's the 16th of June. You will, can I share my screen? If I can share my screen, I'll show you the book. Just 1 second, sorry.
Yeah, no. you should have this opportunity right now, because you're a co-host as well. So
yeah, the only thing is like, how do I do it? I cannot see the share screen anymore now. I could see it before, but I can't see it now. Okay, there you go. Share screen. Okay, just give me 1 second because I want to show you. Can you see this now? Mm-hmm. Now, this is the book that we worked towards for so many months. It's called The Book About Everything. And we basically, myself, Declan Kuipert, and Catherine Wilston, we asked 18 people who are not normally connected with Joyce to write their own original and personal response to Ulysses. So you have writers like Joseph O'Connell, economists like David McWilliams. We have an obstetrician, Runa Mahoney, that run the maternity hospital. That is the place where the Oxen of the Sun chapter is set. We have Laura Marlowe, who's, I believe, she's in Paris, I believe. Then we have the great philosopher Richard Kearney, Marina Carr, and many others. And this is an attempt to send the democratic message that I was talking about before, that Joyce did not write Ulysses for experts or for experts only. He actually wrote the book for us. And this is why, as Anthony Burgess once wisely said, we should all say Ulysses and not Ulysses, because Ulysses have the luck to read not your me. Okay, I should go back to this. Okay, can you still see my screen?
Yes, we
Yes.
Yes, still. You just need to stop sharing. Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's fine. So yeah, that's what we do. And what do you do in Poland? I mean, very curious.
What we can recommend definitely for the Polish viewers, on 16th of June, of course, on Bloomsday, there will be a premiere of spectacle titled Ulysses, of course, directed by a very famous Polish director, Maja Kleczewska. The Polish audience knows what might happen when Maja Kleczewska is directing spectacles. They are extremely brave, and the scars that can be, it might be a scandal in Poznań, probably, so we will see, but we are all waiting for that. And the Ulysses will be based on a translation by Maciej Świerkowski. There are a lot of events linked with this new translation. It's so widely discussed, and it's actually it's read. People are starting to read Ulysses. I think the publisher is printing the third reprint of the Ulysses from the launch from October, so it's very successful. There will be Bloomsday events, I think, all over Poland as well. So we do ours on 2nd of June, well, a bit early, but we have to depend on Maciej Świerkowski timing. And Dominic might say a few words about the embassy ones. What we are going back to in-person meetings, which is, we waited for so long for that. So, and this series, the Taming Joy series, was organized as well on the occasion of centenary. So, Dominic, maybe you would say a few words about the event in Warsaw, because it will gather all, I think, the biggest specialists from Joyce in Poland.
Yes, thanks, Justyna. Very much looking forward to the 14th, which is the date that we're planning to have our Bloomsday event here in Warsaw. As you said, Maciej Świerkowski will also be there as well, the new translator of the translator of the new Polish edition, which again has really successful, which is fantastic to see. So we're going to hear his insights, and also, as you mentioned, from three of the biggest Joyce experts here in Poland. So we have Jerzy Janiewicz, we have Piotr Pazinski, and we have Justyna Sobolewska as well, going to join us on the evening. So very much looking forward to that. It's going to be held in the Teatr Polski here, which is the kind of the eminent Polish theaters here in Warsaw.
Yeah, Liliana, over to you, maybe.
Yes, I'd like to thank Enrico for this Ulysses is about you. I think this is going to be a slogan for next year for our students, because of course we celebrate Ulysses with the students very much throughout the whole academic year. So I think the final question to all of our speakers would be, do you plan anything beyond Bloomsday this year? Is your work on Joyce continued? And if so, in what area? What are your plans after the Bloomsday and after this year's celebrations? We can start with Clíona.
I think that for me, I'll continue to teach Ulysses, and I'm primarily a translation studies scholar, so I'm very interested in looking at the various editions that have been published, and in particularly looking at the genetics of the text. There's a center in Paris called the ITEM, which looks at the genetics of texts, so looks at the hesitations and the differences between one version and another. And I think this is a form of scholarship that our students will continue to do, and perhaps look at the possible applications to other Joyce texts.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Enrico?
Okay, I'm working on, I will be translating Dubliners with my friend Fabio Pedone, with whom I already did the last two books week, and I take the opportunity to say hello to my great friend Krzysztof Barnicki, who is a hero, and it's my hero really.
To have a look at. So Ulysses100.ie essentially brings together information on a range of different events all around the world, actually, celebrating the centenary of Ulysses this year. And so again, as I said, the wide range of things. We also had the and we, as the embassy, participated in this actually for the last number of years, the One Dublin, One Book initiative, which is the idea is, I suppose, to get everybody in, not only in Dublin, but further afield, reading the same book linked to Ireland's capital city. And this year's choice was Nora by Nuala O'Connell, which again reimagines the life of Nora Barnacle, actually, which is a wonderful book. And we were very lucky to have Nuala O'Connell on an online meeting not too long ago, a few weeks ago. So yeah, that's another sort of nice link in with the centenary celebrations as well. A different side of Joyce, perhaps, but certainly a very interesting one for those not only who are familiar with him, but discovering him for the first time. I suppose last year, just to finalize on this, we had as a kind of wider network of, not only the Department of Foreign Affairs, but wider network of embassies, consulates abroad. We have been very active in promoting Joyce worldwide through this kind of our efforts to sort of give Joyce a go. This is what our kind of message has been to people for the last year or two, to maybe pick up Joyce for the first time, give it a go. And we organized a very successful book giveaway, I think in over 50 countries last year, through the embassy network, where members of the public would get a copy of either Ulysses or Dubliners or something else that Joyce has written and discover it for the first time. We had very successful video projects then with the Museum of Literature in Ireland as well, that the department was involved in. I know that in the next few weeks we're going to be discovering more about what they're working on and how we're going to help with that. And as I mentioned, here in Poland, we have our own event coming up on the 14th. We also are planning to extend our book giveaway and various other things here, and engage people in Poland, obviously with the new translation, which very much helps in that. So that's just a flavour of what's coming up, but definitely the online resources. There's a multitude of things there for people to check out if they're interested.
Thank you very, very much. Before we give the floor to our audience, I just have to tell you an anecdote. I read with one of my groups, I read fragments of Nuala O'Connor's Nora, and having read the fragments, they decided that since then they're going to call James Joyce Jim. And I said, okay. We can now get on familiar terms, because that was just a book that reimagined, you put Joyce on a pedestal and a kind of authority that you don't touch, and you are almost afraid to open Ulysses without making a mistake of misreading something. And suddenly they were given a book, and thanks to the embassy also, because I was given additional copies, we managed to read the text in quite large fragments, and they, no, we're going to call him Jim from now on. All right, so here's Jim Joyce for all of us, also for our students here at Adam Mickiewicz University. And I'm very grateful to all of you for participating in our meetings. And I do hope to see you also on the 2nd during the meeting with Madam Ambassador and a kind of early Bloomsday. So thank you very much. I'm giving back Justina the microphone. I hope she's back. She was thrown out of the meeting.
Yes,
and of course, you're welcome to ask questions. Now the floor is open to discussion.
Yes, I'm sorry for this disappearance. I was afraid it will happen at the last meeting. It never happened before, but it's just the charm of Zoom meetings and internet. Okay, so if our audience have any questions, please ask, and you can send the questions by chat as always. I would just say the meeting, all our meetings I mentioned are recorded, and we have the special playlist on the YouTube channel. So I will send you a link. The link will be available as well on our Facebook profile. Well, while we were waiting for the questions, I would like to say a huge thank you for our guests. I'm not a Joyce specialist as well. I'm a reader, and these meetings are opportunity for myself just to learn more. And thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. Okay, we have a question from Karolina Węsławska, Adam Mickiewicz University student. Karolina, I'm not sure if we can say that, but she took part just recently in a competition for translating one of the novels from Dubliners. That was a competition organized by the Polish Association of Irish Studies and Irish Culture Foundation. Is James Joyce or his works perceived as controversial in today's Italy, France, or Ireland?
In France, he's certainly not perceived as controversial. I think he's perceived now as being canonical. And I referred to the edition of the work that before the Pléiade edition, and those publications are really a recognition of the fact that an author has entered the canon of French literature, and I think that is definitely the case for Joyce today.
Italy is a strange situation. We have a strange situation in Italy because for many years Joyce was the private property of intellectuals, and it was really only read and studied by people in the university. Since 10 years now, as I said before, we're trying to give it back to the people, and this is happening. I think I see it because there are so many popular events, so many events in bookshops and outside of the academia. I wouldn't say that it's controversial, but because it was not, Joyce's works were not read enough. But I can tell you one thing. A couple of years ago, when there was the discussion in Italian Parliament about the jus soli, the right to be Italian if you were born in Italy, and I wrote an article in Repubblica, one of the big papers here, by saying that James Joyce, Leopold Bloom, had actually called for this. And he said, when he is attacked by the citizen in Cyclops, and the citizen asks, "What is your nation?" He says, "Ireland, I was born here." Then I wrote about this in the paper, and I received so many insults and attacks, and I had to report this to the police because a lot of people were incredibly angry at me for having said that, not on me, at the message that Joyce actually sent. So I'd say that Joyce is not controversial because it's not known enough. But what we're doing is we're trying to give it back to the people, and it will become controversial. And it's actually many times when I go to give a talk in a place that is not the academia, there are people who are not too satisfied with the things that I say about Joyce. So I think that we still need to become contemporaries of James Joyce, and we still to read him in order to become to see Joyce's works as controversial.
And Ireland, Dominic?
Well, I might have to defer to Clíona on this one, or maybe even Enrico, but I will say that I suppose just from my own sense of it, I suppose would be that obviously Joyce himself had a very complicated relationship with Ireland, as we know, and Ireland of the time was obviously incredibly different to Ireland now. And the one thing that I did think, seeing that question is that perhaps maybe that does help with actually making Joyce a little bit more accessible now to people, in that, you know, perceptions are very different. You know, people view things in very different ways. Ireland is a very, very different country to then, and I suppose even ideas about nationhood, etc., would be profoundly, you know, changed over the last 100 years. So it's an interesting question, I think, for Ireland, and probably we'll have many more debates about that question. But I do think that it certainly is more accessible now than it was, maybe because of that shift in public opinion, I think.
I think that to respond a little bit to what you said, Dominic, I think that when we look at the place of Joyce in Ireland, where we must look at is things like the school curriculum. So, for instance, when I was going to school sometime in the last century, none of Joyce's works were on the school curriculum. He wasn't taught in secondary schools in Ireland. Whereas Ulysses is not on the school curriculum now, it's certainly taught in universities. And I think that short stories from Dubliners and extracts from the portrait of the artist have been put on courses for secondary school students. And I think that marks a major shift, because I think that up until the 1960s in Ireland, Joyce was still regarded as being, if not a dangerous, well then at least a difficult, controversial author. And I think that perception has completely changed.
Thank you. We have another question, and then we have Professor Kruczkowska, but let's start, I think Katarzyna Brown-Bacon was first.
Would you have any tips as to taking Joyce's writing outside of the academic circle? How to start introducing Joyce's text to the local book clubs, high school students, or language training courses? How to give Joyce a go, as Dominic said?
Can I give my tip, my personal tip? I think that's probably the greatest book that introduces Ulysses to a popular audience is Ulysses and Us: The Art of Everyday Living by Declan Kuyper. But you can also refer back to Anthony Burgess, and especially if you want to approach Finnegan's Wake. Anthony Burgess did an abridged edition of Finnegan's Wake called The Shorter Finnegan's Wake, published many years ago. But I know that they are issuing a new edition of this, which will be out pretty soon. So that would be a good starting point for Finnegan's Wake, I think. But yes, for Ulysses, definitely Ulysses and Us.
I think the other thing that's wonderful is there are recordings on various channels and functions and media where you can listen to recordings of Dubliners, you can listen to RTE's radio version of Ulysses. And I think that those are things where you can immerse yourself in the text and you can hear the voice of Dublin in all of those performances. And I think what Joyce is wonderful for is captivating people's voices and people's speech. And that's a very important means of access.
Thank you very much. And Professor Kruczkowska, would you like to ask a question directly or by chat? I'm not sure.
If I may, because I wanted to say hello to Clíona.
Hi, Ivana, how are you?
Nice to see you again. I wanted to ask you about the French translation, or actually the gap, that 80 years gap between the first edition and, as I got it, this was the second translation to 2004, yes, 2004. So it's almost 80 years. And you've mentioned the debt of loyalty to the first edition, and I was wondering, it's a bit strange to perceive this first translation perhaps as not outdated in terms of language and style for 80 years. What do you think about it? Was there a need for a new translation before that? Were there any attempts or fragments or?
Well, I think that there are two factors there. I think first of all, the fact that people said that the first translation was overseen by Joyce gave it a kind of imprimatur, which meant that, you know, people felt that that translation, even though Joyce hadn't translated it himself into French, that he had overseen it, and therefore it was as excellent a translation as it could be. I think the second factor was the presence in France of James Joyce's grandson, Stephen James Joyce, who was a staunch defender of his grandfather's legacy, and who didn't like and who refused lots of things. He lived in France, he worked for the OECD, and he had a very peculiar relationship with academics in particular. I know that your friend and mine, André Topia, for instance, who was to have been involved in the second translation of Ulysses, didn't become involved because Stephen James Joyce had a grudge against him. He disliked him intensely and refused to allow André Topia, who was one of France's greatest Joyce scholars, to become involved in the translation. So the personality of his grandson and the relationship that he had with anybody who he felt was trying to infringe or damage or exploit his grandfather's work meant that it was very difficult, I think, for people to envisage other translations and other publications. And I'm sure that Enrico could contribute more on the personality of Stephen James Joyce and his relationship with people who were trying to get Joyce's work published.
Yeah, no, it was difficult. I know so many cases of scholars who were prevented from even quoting from his books unless they paid a lot of money to the James Joyce estate. So this is no longer the case, because a lot of the works by Joyce are now public domain. Not all of them, but a lot of them. The versions published during his lifetime are now public domain in Europe. So we don't have that problem anymore. But the problem remains for a lot of works like those published after the death of Joyce, like Giacomo Joyce, for instance, or the Gabler edition. I know that in Europe sometimes they translate the Gabler edition, but that's technically illegal, and so it's still kind of problematic. But yes, now we're in a much better situation, I think.
I think we will finish with the last question. I'm conscious of your time, and we don't want to Professor Terrinoni to be left in the university, closed university overnight. So, translation-wise, is there anything particularly problematic from French or Italian translator, non-translatable at all? Perhaps phrases, notions, adjectives, expletives. Help me with that last words. Question to translator.
That's a question for you, Enrico.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, to answer this question, I mean, this needs a PhD. I mean, every word, almost every word in especially in Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake is almost impossible to translate. But then you know that you have to translate the book. I mean, the perfect situation for a translator of Joyce would be to just get the money and not to translate the book and leave them as they are. But publishers don't like that, you know. So they want you to change the book, because when you translate, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're changing every word, every syllable, every sound. So you're turning it into something else. Now, if I have to speak as a translator about the technicalities of translation, I think that the most impossible thing to translate in Ulysses is when he plays with, for instance, when he creates palindromes. Like at some stage, we have the expression "Madam, I madam," okay, "Madam, I madam," which can be read from left or right, and it looks the same. And when you have that, what do you do? Now, what did I do when I translate that? First of all, I drank three bottles of wine, and they really helped. And then I realized that the only person that could say such a thing, Madam, I'm Adam, is actually Adam to Eve, okay? There was no other person there. So I translated this into Latin. So in Italian, Madam and Madam becomes Ave Eva. Ave means hail, Eva is Eve. So Ave Eva is a palindrome, and it worked basically in the same way if you look at it, but not if you listen to it. It's something different. It's of course a different solution, of course. And then again, it's Latin and not Italian. So those are the difficult things to me when he plays with this stuff. Like when he, or for instance, when he uses the word ham meaning ham, the thing that people who like pork eat, but also Ham, the son of Noah. In Italian, we don't have that because Ham, the son of Noah, is Cam, whereas Ham, the ham is prosciutto cotto. So what do you do? Like when I had to do that, I had to invent a word. And the word that I invented is insacco, which similar to Isacco, the son of Abraham, and insaccati, which is pure meat, the salami, right? So I created a new word. Is that a translation? Is that proper? Is that too creative? Is that, for one thing, it is not as beautiful as Joyce's ambiguity, because he uses one word to mean two things, whereas I have to invent a word which means other things, and which actually will make both pork butchers and Bible scholars very, very angry for having basically mistranslated such a great pun. So I think the puns and when Joyce plays with words, but that's what he does all the time, you know. So Joyce shouldn't be translated, but we have to do it.
Yeah, for all the readers all over the world. Thank you very much for answering this question, and thank you to all our speakers for participating in this last event of Oswajanie Joyce'a Training Joyce online series, but as well a huge thank you to all the previous participants who all are academics from the Polish Association of Irish Studies, Professor Katarzyna Bazarnik and Professor Leszek Brąk, to Professor Jerzy Jarniewicz, who was actually having a meeting with him, and he was talking about translating Joyce as well, of course, and to historian Liz Gillis and the Embassy of Ireland, of course, Ambassador and Dominic and Jana Warecka, the culture officer of the embassy. And I would like to say a huge thank you as well to our audience, because we have some people who started with us with the first meeting, and they've never missed one. And especially students from high school from Warsaw, high school number 11. You're probably the best educated and Joyce young people in Poland right now after all those meetings. And hopefully we'll be able to see each other in Warsaw at the embassy meeting. And well, we can thank each other, English Department of Adam University and Honorary Consulate of Ireland in Poznań, but we definitely would like to organize another series about Irish literature. So we will definitely keep you posted about that. Liliana, would you like to add something to it?
Yes, well, I'd like to join you in thanking our audience, my students especially, for my master students for helping and participating and kind of alleviating my technical doubts. That's especially to Carolina, and she knows what I'm talking about. I'm really bad with certain technical things, and without the younger generation, I wouldn't be able to do a lot of things. So, and also my colleagues from the Department of English Literature, thank you very much for just being here and supporting the venture. But of course, to Justyna, you know, we inspire each other, I guess, with the readings and preparations, and there was never anything that we would have to debate upon. It's just, you know, the work was, I'll do this and we'll do that, and it's done. And this has been the whole year of things done. So I do thank you, because you kept me on check, but I think we work in a similar fashion. So that was part of the success. And of course to Krzysztof for also being with us and helping and participating and preparing and using his contacts to invite our guests. To all our guests, a huge thank you from me and from my colleagues. Back to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
much.
Thank you. Good night.